Hello, my name is Mila. I was always the quiet one in my family, the one they never took seriously. Until one evening, I heard my sister laugh. She's so dumb. I took her money. She doesn't even know. And my mother? She didn't stop her. She encouraged her. That night, I didn't cry. I hit record. I asked about the missing fund at dinner, and my sister's hand trembled around her wine glass. They thought I'd stay silent forever. But what happens when the quiet one fights back? Have you ever realized too late that the people draining you share your last name? It was supposed to be a quick stop, 10 minutes at most. I had one last folder to drop off at Mom's house, part of the final paperwork for Dad's estate. The sun had just started to dip below the trees, and the air outside still held that lingering Texas spring warmth. I didn't even bother to text ahead. We were family. You don't need an invitation to your mother's house. At least, that's what I used to believe. I parked in front of the brick house I'd grown up in, windows glowing, porch light already on. The old azaleas in the front yard were in full bloom, just like every March. I stepped up onto the porch, papers clutched in my arm, and turned the knob slowly. The door was unlocked. From the foyer, I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. Familiar voices. Mom's and my sister's. I was about to call out, let them know I was home, when Seraphine's voice sliced through the quiet like a razor. "She's so dumb," she said, her tone sharp and disgusted. "I took her money. She doesn't even know." I froze. The hallway suddenly felt too narrow, the walls pressing in. My hand instinctively pulled back from the edge of the doorway. My breath caught in my throat, chest tightening, but my feet stayed rooted. Then came Mom's voice, calm, matter-of-fact. "Keep draining her. She's too soft to fight back." I stopped breathing. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. That my brain had twisted the sounds, played a trick on me. But no, they said what they said, and they meant it. I leaned back against the wall, eyes wide, heart hammering. A hot wave of something, I couldn't tell if it was rage or grief, washed over me. I felt it rise to my chest, burning and freezing all at once. I couldn't move. I couldn't make sense of what I'd heard. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't one offhand comment taken out of context. This was a plan, a tactic, a shared understanding between my mother and my sister. And I was the target. I heard Seraphine laugh. "She's practically begging to be taken advantage of. She hands over money like it's Halloween candy." Mom chuckled lightly. "That's why we don't say anything. She wants to feel useful. Let her." My stomach twisted. My hand, still holding the paperwork, began to shake. Pages fluttered under my arm. My fingers went numb. Flashes of memory rushed in, helping Seraphine pay her student loans, co-signing on her first car when Dad said no, giving her access to some of Dad's accounts, just in case. Every time, I'd thought I was doing the right thing. That family came first, that helping each other was what we did. I thought I was loved, respected even. But what I heard in that kitchen was something else entirely. I wasn't loved. I was convenient. I stepped back into the hallway. My phone was in my back pocket. I pulled it out slowly, heart still pounding in my ears. My thumb hovered over the record button. I hesitated. For half a second. This felt wrong, invasive. But then I remembered her voice. "She's so dumb." I pressed record. No more giving them the benefit of the doubt. No more letting things slide. I held the phone low, careful not to make a sound. Seraphine kept talking, gloating about how she'd shifted some assets and opened a joint account just in case. Mom nodded along, murmuring her approval. My face burned, but I didn't move. When the conversation finally drifted into mundane things, grocery lists, some friend's retirement party, I stepped back. Quietly, I slipped out the door. The screen door creaked slightly, and I winced, but no one followed. Back in my car, I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment. I didn't start the engine. I didn't even buckle my seatbelt. I just stared straight ahead, breathing hard. That house, the one behind me. It was no longer a place of comfort. It was where betrayal lived. Finally, I turned the key. The engine purred to life. I pulled out slowly, driving aimlessly down quiet streets, streetlights flickering on one by one as dusk deepened into night. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go home. Not yet. Tears blurred my vision as I passed neighborhoods I'd known my whole life. The ice cream shop we used to go to after Sunday church. The corner gas station where Seraphine taught me to drive. Every landmark felt tainted now. When I finally pulled into my apartment parking lot, the sky had gone black. I climbed out, legs heavy, and trudged up the stairs to my unit. Inside, I dropped the file folder on the counter. I didn't even bother to turn on the main lights. I moved through the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the sink, letting the coolness of the glass ground me. I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered again, this time over the playback button, and I listened. Their voices filled the room, cold and clear. "She's so dumb." I took her money. "Keep draining her." Each word landed like a punch, but strangely, the more I listened, the less power they seemed to hold. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going to cry. Not now. They called me soft. Maybe I was. But soft doesn't mean stupid. And stupid is letting them get away with this. I walked to my bedroom, sat at the edge of my bed, and replayed the recording one more time. Then I opened my laptop and started a folder labeled Proof. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew one thing. This time, I wouldn't let it slide. I stared out the window, watching the wind rustle through the trees. My face was still, but inside, a storm had started. They thought I was soft. Then they'd never heard me silent, with a plan. I didn't sleep, not even a little. After replaying that recording a dozen times, I sat on the floor with my laptop open and every financial document I could get my hands on. Bank statements, wire transfers, estate disbursements, trust account summaries, all of it. Line by line, I traced the movement of money, dates, amounts, signatures. Some transactions looked familiar, small ones, things I knew about, but others, payments I never authorized, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. An $18,000 consulting fee to a holding company I'd never heard of. All conveniently timed weeks after my father passed, when Valora pushed me to let Seraphine help with the heavy lifting. By sunrise, I wasn't angry anymore, just focused, coldly, precisely focused. That same morning, I texted Seraphine and Valora. "Dinner tonight. My treat. Just us. Haven't caught up in a while." Seraphine replied first. "Of course. So proud of you for reaching out." Valora sent a thumbs-up emoji. That alone made my jaw clench. By early evening, I'd already picked the place. A chic restaurant downtown they both liked. White tablecloths, exposed brick walls, and waiters who called everyone ma'am or sir, no matter how young you looked. A spot that matched Seraphine's version of herself. Classy, unbothered, elevated. I arrived 5 minutes early and asked for a booth in the corner. Somewhere I could see them clearly. Somewhere private enough for what was about to happen. They walked in together. Seraphine wore a pale pink blazer and heels too high for a weekday. Valora had on pearls, her hair stiff with hairspray, her eyes already scanning the room for familiar faces. I stood to greet them, hugged each one politely, then slid back into my seat like this was just another Tuesday. For the first few minutes, it was small talk. Work, neighborhood gossip, a bit of fake laughter from Seraphine when I mentioned I'd been going through some of Dad's files. "Oh, I forgot how meticulous he was," I said, sipping my water. "Even his sticky notes were dated." Valora nodded, smiling. "Your father always did like order. I suppose it skipped a generation, though." I smiled back. "I don't know. I guess it depends on what kind of order we're talking about." Seraphine placed her napkin delicately on her lap and looked around. "This place is cute. You really are growing up, Mila." There it was, that tone, the one where every compliment came wrapped in condescension, like I was the family intern just lucky to be invited to the meeting. We placed our orders. Valora got the halibut. Seraphine, a kale salad with grilled chicken. I barely looked at the menu, ordered soup and a side of patience. When the server stepped away, I leaned slightly forward, resting my hands on the edge of the table. "So, I've been reviewing the Morningside Fund," I said, casual, even. "The one I transferred to after Dad's will was executed?" Seraphine's smile tightened. Valora reached for her wine. It hasn't posted any returns, I continued, eyes on Seraphine. I just wanted to check. Did it roll over somewhere else? For a beat, no one spoke. Then Seraphine gave a short, airy laugh. Oh, yeah, that. I think it was delayed. You know how those things go. Market fluctuations, holding periods, whatever. She waved her hand as if brushing away a fly. Valora jumped in. Mila, really, it's a small amount. Why stress about it? I tilted my head, smiled faintly. Because Dad stressed about every dollar. Remember? Silence. Seraphine's fingers wrapped tighter around her wine glass. I watched closely as the stem tilted just slightly. A tremble, barely visible. But it was there. I said nothing more. Just let the silence breathe. The server returned with our food. The moment passed, but not for me. I caught the glance Seraphine threw at Valora. A quiet signal. One I'd seen before, usually when I was being dismissed from a conversation that wasn't for me. We ate. They moved the conversation forward, tried to, at least. Talked about a charity gala next weekend some influencer Seraphine was partnering with. Valora complained about HOA politics again. I smiled and nodded, let them fill the space with noise. But under the table, my hand hovered near my purse. Inside was a slim flash drive holding the recording. I wasn't going to pull it out, not yet. This wasn't the time, not in public, but I wanted them to know I knew, to feel that shift. Seraphine was slipping. She had no idea how obvious she was. And Valora? She had always been skilled at avoiding direct confrontation. She preferred guilt, quiet pressure. Her game was to smother you in obligation. But I was done playing. Halfway through dessert, none of us really eating, I asked one more question. By the way, I said lightly, how's that consulting group you set up last year, Seraphine? The one you said I'd be a silent partner in? Seraphine's fork paused midair. Oh, I didn't move forward with that, she said quickly. The market wasn't right. I nodded slowly. That's interesting. I saw my name on some of the filings. She blinked. What? Just something I found while organizing Dad's estate files. Might be old drafts. I'll send them over. Maybe you can help me understand. Her mouth opened, then closed. Valora leaned in, voice tight. Mila, enough. Why are you doing this? I turned to her, still smiling. Doing what, Mom? You know what I mean. Stirring things up. This is not the time or the place. I picked up my spoon, stirred my tea slowly. I didn't stir anything. I asked about a fund and a business I may or may not be tied to, that's all. More silence. I looked between them, calm, composed, and saw it clear as day. They weren't angry because I was wrong. They were rattled because I was right, and afraid. They'd underestimated me for so long. They forgot I was watching, listening, documenting. I didn't need to raise my voice or point fingers. All I needed was their reaction. Seraphine paid the bill with a smile too wide for her face. Valora mumbled something about being tired. We exchanged hugs, fake as ever, and parted ways at the valet. In my car, I sat for a few seconds before pulling out the flash drive and placing it on the console. I wasn't going to use it yet, but I had it, and now I'd seen them squirm. By the time I got home, the city had long quieted. Streetlights flickered against the windshield as I pulled into my spot and cut the engine. My hands lingered on the wheel, fingers stiff. I could still hear Seraphine's forced laugh, could still see the twitch in her wrist when I brought up that missing fund. The way Valora tried to steer the conversation back to safer waters. They weren't just lying, they were afraid I might finally stop playing dumb. I entered my apartment in silence, kicked off my shoes by the door, and tossed my keys on the entry table with a dull clatter. The lights stayed off. The only illumination came from the oven clock and the low hum of the fridge. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine, not because I wanted it, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. The wine sat untouched on the counter while I leaned back against the sink, the cold granite pressing into my spine. My body felt exhausted, but my mind was far from done. I stared into the dark and let the quiet grow thick around me. And that's when the memories crept in. It always starts the same, one tiny detail unlocked from the back of my mind. This time, it was a memory from when I was 9. There was $20 missing from Mom's wallet. I remember sitting at the dining room table, legs swinging off the edge of the chair, Valora standing behind Mom, arms crossed. I didn't even know the money was gone until I heard Mom's voice, sharp and disappointed. "Mila, I'm not asking again. Did you take the money?" I shook my head, too scared to speak. Valora said nothing. She just stared at me with wide eyes and that quiet smirk. The one that said, "You're already losing." She never defended me. Not once. And Mom? She sighed, told me she was disappointed, and grounded me for a week. It wasn't until years later I learned Valora had used it to buy concert tickets with her friends. That memory spilled into another, then another. The summer I got accepted into a prestigious internship in Boston. I was so excited, I'd even started looking at sublets near campus. Then Valora claimed she needed to stay close to home that summer for mental health reasons. Mom asked if I could decline the offer so we could all be together. "You're the baby," she said. "You'll have more chances." I didn't argue. I never did. Back then, I thought being agreeable made me good, that sacrificing made me valuable. But now, sitting here with a glass of wine I wasn't drinking and my heart racing against my ribs, I saw it clearly. I wasn't their daughter or their sister. I was the buffer, the scapegoat. The one expected to nod and hand over her piece so the others could feel bigger. I stood up slowly, walked to my bedroom, and pulled open the drawer of my nightstand. A leather-bound journal I hadn't touched in years waited quietly inside. I opened it, flipped past pages filled with half-thoughts, scribbled dreams, little bits of hope I'd tucked away. And then I picked up the pen. They raised me to accept less. I wrote it down like a headline. I don't anymore. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from something stronger, something steadier. I stared at those 2 sentences until they stopped looking like words and started feeling like decisions. I placed the journal back into the drawer and closed it gently. Then I walked to the shelf where old photo albums lived in dust and disuse. One thin frame stood out. Dad and me, standing by the garden, both wearing wide-brimmed straw hats. I must have been 7 or 8. He was showing me how to plant tomatoes. He used to say, "You see things the rest of us don't, Mila. That's your gift. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Back then, I thought he meant I had an imagination. Now I wondered if he was warning me. I held the photo against my chest and let myself sink into the couch. The quiet didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt like armor. I whispered into the stillness. Maybe it's time I act like it. Outside, the wind moved the trees gently, tapping their branches against the windows in rhythmic thought. I watched shadows dance across the ceiling and let my mind settle into something firm. I got up again, moved to the small filing cabinet tucked in the corner near my desk. I hadn't opened that drawer since the funeral. Inside were all the estate documents, the legal filings, the trust breakdowns, some handwritten notes Dad left taped to folders, still in his blocky print. I knelt down, pulled the drawer open, and flipped through until I found the one I needed, marked in red pen, Personal Allocations. I carried it to the kitchen, cleared the counter with a quiet sweep of my arm, and spread everything out like a crime board. If they'd touched anything that was his, I'd know. I stayed up long past midnight, cross-referencing every file I had on the estate with the ones I'd pulled from Dad's old desk drawer. It wasn't just about being thorough anymore, it was about being certain. I needed proof, not paranoia. The morning after, I let myself sleep in a little. My body was tired, but my mind had already run several laps by the time I opened my eyes. Coffee in hand, I went over the last few documents again, highlighting discrepancies. One caught my eye, an unusually timed $25,000 transfer from an account tied to the estate. That particular account had been meant for long-term care services, no longer needed after Dad passed. I hadn't authorized anything to move from it. I dialed my personal banker at First Hill Bank, the one Dad had used for decades. It was a Friday morning, almost noon, and the hold time was surprisingly short. When he picked up, his tone was as polite as ever. Good morning, this is Scott. How can I help you, Mila? Hi, Scott. I was reviewing the estate trust accounts. There's a recent $25,000 transaction I don't recognize. Can you check who authorized it? Let me pull that up, he said, typing. I walked into the living room, phone pressed between my shoulder and ear, flipping through the folder again. Scott cleared his throat on the other end. It was approved using a power of attorney credential, last year's version. It's tied to your sister's authorization. You didn't confirm this? No, I didn't, I said sharply. She's not authorized anymore. That POA was revoked when Dad passed. There was a pause. It's odd, honestly. The system still accepted the code. We'll need to flag that and investigate internally. I thanked him, ended the call, and stood there for a long moment, heart heavy but mind completely clear. She was still moving money, behind my back, under my name, using power she was never supposed to have again. I took a breath. Then I picked up the keys. It was time to visit Valora. The drive over was quiet. My hands didn't shake this time. I wasn't walking into her house as her little girl. I wasn't looking for approval or softness. I was walking in as someone ready to confront the rot everyone had politely ignored for too long. Valora answered the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching through the blinds. She looked composed, hair neatly pinned back, lips painted in her usual mauve shade, a cardigan thrown over her blouse like she was hosting a garden club meeting. Mila, she said with that manufactured warmth, didn't expect to see you. Can we talk? I asked. She hesitated, then opened the door wider. Of course. Inside, the house looked exactly the same. The scent of lemon polish, the porcelain plates on the wall, the slightly too loud ticking of the grandfather clock. I stood in the kitchen, laying the manila folder on the counter. I found a problem, I said. Seraphine's been moving money again, using old credentials. $25,000 went out last week. Valora didn't even blink. She poured herself a glass of iced tea like I'd just told her the forecast. You're imagining things again, she said without looking up. No, I'm not, I said. The bank confirmed it. They're opening an investigation. Valora finally looked at me. Her expression was calm, too calm. Mila, you've always had a tendency to spiral. You don't sleep, you overthink, and then you come up with these stories. My jaw tightened. This isn't a story. This is a legal violation. She smiled faintly and offered me tea. Sit. Have something to drink. I'm not thirsty. Well, I'm not doing this if you're going to come in here all accusatory, she said, finally showing irritation. Seraphine has always carried so much on her shoulders. She's trying to do her best. By draining Dad's accounts? Don't be dramatic, she snapped. It's not draining, it's adjusting. You're too emotional to understand how this works. My voice was calm, even when my hands weren't. You can keep trying to spin this, but the bank already flagged it. There's going to be an audit. She placed the glass down and crossed her arms. And what, Mila? You think this is going to end with you looking like the hero? You've always needed someone to blame when things didn't go your way. That's not what this is. She narrowed her eyes. No? Because it sounds a lot like you're playing victim again. You always do this. Something goes wrong, and suddenly it's the world against you. I stood still. I let her finish. Then I said, slowly, I'm not 9 years old anymore. I'm not going to sit here while you pretend this is about my feelings. She stared at me for a moment, then laughed quietly. There it is. The performance. You think being cold makes you strong? No. I think refusing to be lied to makes me sane. Silence settled between us like a weight. She picked up the folder, flipped it open briefly, and then closed it again like it offended her. You've changed, she said. I had to. I turned to leave. You walk out now, she called after me, and there's no coming back. I didn't even pause. Outside, the sun was high, but the breeze had picked up. It tugged at my sweater as I walked back to my car. I opened the door, got in, and stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror for a moment. I looked tired, not weak, just done. I took out my phone, scrolled to Maribel's contact, pressed call. Hey, she answered. You okay? No, I said. But I know what I'm doing now. I need a referral for a lawyer, the kind who deals with estate fraud. She didn't hesitate. Got it. I'll text you 2 names. Want me to sit in when you talk to them? No, I think I need to do this part alone. All right, I'm proud of you, Mila. I hung up and leaned back in the seat, letting the silence wrap around me again. This time, it wasn't the same silence from before, the one that held confusion and pain. This silence felt different. It felt like the breath before a storm. They wanted the old version of me, the quiet one, the one who nodded, who didn't ask questions, who handed over everything with a smile and got a pat on the head in return. But that Mila, she was gone. You wanted a quiet Mila, I whispered. Now you'll meet the version who reads every line. By Monday morning, I had already scheduled the meeting. A full week had passed since the confrontation at Mom's house. Since then, I'd spoken to an attorney, started documenting every unauthorized transaction, and compiled a folder of evidence that made even my lawyer raise an eyebrow. But I wasn't ready to go to court yet, not without one final card to play. So I invited Seraphine to lunch. She replied within minutes. Finally, her message read, glad to see you're ready to move on. She had no idea what she was walking into. The business club I chose was tucked into a quiet corner of downtown Austin. Seraphine used to brag about her membership there. Real leaders don't meet over brunch, she'd say. They make decisions over mahogany tables and crystal water glasses. So I picked a private conference room on the 2nd floor. Quiet, comfortable, respectable. She arrived 5 minutes late, on brand. Designer heels clicking against the hardwood, hair curled, makeup done just so. She looked the part, confident, in control, untouched by scandal. Mila, she said, air-kissing my cheek. You look rested. I smiled, gestured toward the chair across from me. Thanks for making time. She placed her purse on the table and glanced around. This is a nice spot. Good to see you trying to level up. I ignored the dig. Let's get started. I won't keep you long. From my folder, I pulled 2 sheets of paper and placed them gently on the table between us. One was Dad's original estate summary. The second, a copy of a signed contract Seraphine had used in a business pitch last quarter. My name was at the bottom. Her eyes barely flicked over the documents. What's this? Something I found while reviewing filings, I said evenly. This contract lists me as a partner in your project. I never signed it, never agreed to be part of it. She waved her hand, brushing it off like lint. Mila, please. It's standard language. You wouldn't understand the legal jargon. It doesn't mean anything. It does to the IRS and the Texas Business Registry. She blinked, then tilted her head and smiled. You're really going to nitpick this? After everything I've done for this family? You mean everything you've taken? She leaned back in her chair. Wow, so this is what this is. Some vendetta because Mom favors me. You're not mad about the contract, Mila. You're mad that I win. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small silver recorder, set it gently on the table. Her expression shifted just slightly, almost imperceptibly. I want to play you something, I said. Her lips parted, but I didn't wait for permission. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, sharp and unmistakable. She's so dumb. I took her money. She doesn't even know. There was no mistaking the tone, the arrogance, the cruelty. Seraphine's face drained of color. You recorded me? She asked, voice tight. Yes. That's illegal. Actually, I said, keeping my voice low and even, in Texas it's legal. One-party consent. I leaned in slightly. And I was the party. She opened her mouth again, then closed it. I let the silence hang between us for a beat longer before pressing stop. The room felt smaller now. She shifted in her chair, arms crossed tightly. You really think you're going to win this little war? She finally muttered. You've always been the fragile one. This doesn't suit you. I'm not here to win, I said. I'm here to end it. I pulled out one last envelope, an official legal notice. I slid it across the table toward her. Cease and desist, I said. Effective immediately. You will remove my name from any company documents, close any accounts tied to me, and halt all use of estate resources. If you don't, I file. Her hands trembled as she picked up the paper. This is insane. No, I said. This is overdue. Her expression contorted, trying to find the right tone, mockery, pity, anger. But none of them landed. She was cornered, and she knew it. I can't believe you do this to me, she said, voice cracking. I looked her straight in the eyes. You should have thought about that before you forged my name. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the wood. You're going to regret this. I didn't flinch. She gathered her things in a fury and stormed out without another word. I stayed seated, slowly exhaling the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The room was quiet again. Peaceful, almost. I reached for the folder, slid the documents back into place, and closed it with care. My hand lingered over the recorder for a moment before I tucked it away. She had expected me to fold. Again. She had expected me to cry, to apologize, to ask her not to be mad, but I didn't. Not this time. As I walked out of the conference room and down the polished hallway, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded, steady. At the elevator, I glanced at my reflection in the mirrored doors. There was no fear in my eyes, just clarity. I whispered to myself, they're used to me folding. Let's see how they handle fire. When I got back to my apartment that night, my phone buzzed before I even had time to take off my coat. A notification from my email, then another, then a third. I tossed my keys into the bowl on the entry table and slid my phone out of my pocket, scanning the subject lines. New comment on your mental health journey? Blog pingback. The truth about Mila. My stomach sank. I opened the email with shaking fingers. There it was. A brand new post on Seraphine's personal growth blog, one she hadn't updated in months. This new post, polished and full of syrupy language, detailed her experience navigating difficult family dynamics, referencing a loved one with a history of delusions and controlling behavior. She never used my name. She didn't need to. Every subtle jab, every veiled sentence painted me as unstable, overbearing, dangerous. And the comments? Dozens already. Supportive, fawning replies from her followers. You're so brave to share this. Family can be toxic. Protect your peace. Been there. Cutting ties was the best thing I ever did. I blinked slowly and locked my phone. I didn't feel anger, not in the way I used to. I felt something colder, sharper. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, the clink of ice against the glass grounding me. Then I picked up the folder I'd used in our last meeting. Time to take this further. My phone buzzed again, a text from my lawyer. Seraphine's public now. We move. Time to respond. I texted back, do it. The next morning, the real retaliation began. On my terms. First, I emailed a formal report to the board of directors of Seraphine's startup, attached. Copies of the contracts she'd signed using my name, along with time-stamped audio files from our meeting. I included a brief statement. I will be pursuing legal action for fraud and identity misuse. Second, I forwarded the same package to 2 tech journalists I'd worked with in the past, women I'd helped pro bono during their early freelance years. I knew they wouldn't run a hit piece, but they'd follow the money trail. Lastly, I posted nothing. Silence, for once, would speak louder. By early afternoon, I got a call from Maribel. She's scrambling, she said. One of her investors is asking questions, and guess who just reached out to me privately? Let me guess, I replied. Her assistant? Former assistant, she corrected. She quit last month and she's got receipts. We scheduled a meeting that same evening. Over coffee at a quiet corner cafe, the woman, Ari, shared a string of emails, Slack messages, and a document trail that revealed Seraphine had been using me as a shadow investor to appear more legitimate. She said it made the project feel safer, like it had family backing, Ari explained. I didn't know you weren't involved until the article started circulating. She used me, I said. She uses everyone, Ari said, sipping her drink. But she's sloppy when she thinks no one's watching. I thanked her and asked if she'd be willing to speak to my legal team. She agreed without hesitation. By the end of the week, the pressure had built to a breaking point. Seraphine was summoned to a formal mediation meeting at my lawyer's office. I arrived early, dressed simply but professionally, carrying nothing but my folder and resolve. She arrived 15 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses and tension like perfume. We sat across from each other in a glass-walled room, the mediator, a calm, gray-haired woman named Lisa, greeting us both with practiced neutrality. Let's begin. I didn't flinch. I opened my folder and placed 3 things on the table. 1. The original estate documentation listing my authority. 2. The fake contract bearing my forged signature. 3. The printed blog post Seraphine had written, complete with highlighted sentences that could be construed as libel. Seraphine didn't say a word. Then Lisa turned to me. Ms. Thorne, would you like to start? I met Seraphine's eyes. I stayed silent out of love. I didn't want this to be public. I didn't want to hurt you. But I'm not going to love you more than I respect myself. That ended when you started treating me like a pawn. Seraphine opened her mouth. Mila, this is being blown way out of proportion. Lisa held up a hand. Let her finish. I continued. You signed my name on contracts. You accessed restricted accounts. You used Dad's death to push your career forward and gaslight me when I asked questions. You always exaggerate things, she snapped. You've done that since we were kids. I turned to Lisa. This is why we're here. Seraphine's composure began to crumble. Her arms folded across her chest. Her leg bounced. Her voice rose. You're trying to ruin me. You always needed to be the victim. And now you're dragging me down, just because you can't handle that I succeeded. I didn't respond. My attorney beside me stayed quiet, scribbling notes. Lisa looked at Seraphine. We can pause if you need a moment. No, Seraphine said, face flushed. She's making this a witch hunt. You did this, I said, my tone steady. Not me. Lisa looked between us. This will be documented. We'll proceed with a summary to both parties by next week. Seraphine stood abruptly. I'm done. I'm not listening to this crap. And she walked out, heels clicking violently against the tile. I remained in my chair, still holding the evidence. The mediator turned to me with a soft nod. We have more than enough, she said quietly. I didn't smile, didn't celebrate. I just gathered my papers, slid them back into the folder, and stood up. As I walked down the hall toward the elevators, I could still hear Seraphine's voice echoing from the front lobby. She was shouting at someone on her phone, pacing like a trapped animal. Let her unravel, let her shout, let her burn herself down. Because this time, I wasn't handing her the match. I closed the door to my apartment and set the folder on the kitchen counter, the weight of it landing with a soft thud that echoed louder than it should have. The next morning came quicker than expected. I didn't sleep much, just enough to function. Coffee was already brewing before the sun had risen above the Austin skyline. I sat on the edge of the couch with my mug in hand, not drinking, just staring at the muted TV. Then a soft ding from my phone snapped me out of the fog. It was an email from someone I hadn't heard from in nearly a year. Julia Palmer, a hiring manager for a regional finance firm I'd interviewed with last spring. Subject line, for your eyes only. I tapped it open and the words stopped me cold. Mila, I feel I owe you an apology. After our interview last year, we received a phone call and later a letter, both from your sister. She expressed concern about your mental stability and strongly advised us not to move forward with you. At the time, we took it seriously, but I now believe it was meant to sabotage your chances. I'm deeply sorry. I put the phone down slowly, heart thudding, not from surprise, but confirmation. It had always lingered in the back of my mind. How that interview ended so abruptly, how the tone shifted halfway through. They'd told me I was overqualified, then said they needed someone less high maintenance. I had walked out confused, humiliated. Now I knew why. Seraphine had made sure to dim my light long before I started shining on my own. I pressed my palms against my thighs and closed my eyes. This wasn't just about Dad's money, or the contract, or even the forged signatures. This was about all the doors she'd quietly shut behind my back, the lies she told, the way she kept me tethered to the idea that I was too sensitive, too reactive, too emotional. I wasn't too anything. I just wasn't cruel, and that made me dangerous to someone who was. Later that afternoon, I met Maribel for a quiet lunch at a small diner on Burnett Road. It was one of those places with cracked leather booths and strong coffee that never tasted burned. She slid into the seat across from me, coat still buttoned, and studied my face. "You look sharp," she said, "like someone with a decision already made." "I got an email this morning," I said, passing her the phone. She read it quickly, her face tightening as she reached the end. "She called your future employer? She made sure I wouldn't get a future at all." Maribel sighed and folded her hands on the table. "You've given her every opportunity to step back quietly, to fix it. She burned every exit." "I'm done cleaning up her messes," I said, voice steady. "Now she'll answer for them." Maribel nodded. "We'll draft the paperwork today." And we did. That same evening, I walked into the Travis County Courthouse, file in hand, ready to file the civil lawsuit: identity theft, financial fraud, defamation. The clerk behind the glass didn't blink as I handed over the documents. She stamped them, slid them into the system, and gave me a copy. "Case number will be assigned by Monday," she said. "Thank you," I replied. Then I left. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text Seraphine. I didn't warn Valora. No more polite explanations. No more warnings. By the next day, the lawsuit had hit the public record, and by noon, it had hit the press. I didn't leak it. I didn't have to. Someone from Seraphine's investor circle must have flagged the filing. It spread like wildfire on local forums, then national blogs. And then, Seraphine started to post. First, it was subtle. "Some people will do anything for attention," she tweeted. Then a cryptic quote on Instagram. "The truth always comes out. So do the liars." Her comments were filled with sympathy. People who didn't know the truth, who believed in her polished image, her self-made narrative, her designer wardrobe, and weekly affirmations. But the lawsuit didn't care how shiny her Instagram was. It only cared about facts. That weekend, I didn't leave my apartment. I organized every document, every communication, every screenshot into labeled folders. My lawyer called it overkill. I called it insurance. The following Monday, a reporter from the Chronicle reached out. "We're doing a piece on the lawsuit," she said. "Would you like to comment?" "No," I told her, "but I hope you get the story right." And then, Tuesday morning, I turned on the TV to find my sister's face on the screen, not at a charity gala, not accepting another award, but under the headline, "High-profile tech executive sued by sister for fraud, defamation." I didn't smile. I didn't feel joy. I felt still. Because it wasn't revenge, it was release. I sat on the couch, watching them debate her guilt on morning talk shows, watching panelists guess what kind of sister would do such a thing. They didn't know. They didn't see the late nights of sabotage, the years of being erased with a smile. They didn't hear the conversations I'd recorded or see the way Valora looked through me instead of at me. But I saw something else. My reflection in the black screen, glassy and steady. "You made me the villain," I whispered to myself. "Now I'll be the storm." The courthouse stood still under a pale morning sky, its clean stone face catching the early light like it had nothing to hide. The sidewalks buzzed with quiet anticipation, reporters with notepads, camera crews unloading equipment, a few curious onlookers sipping coffee and pretending not to stare. Inside, it was colder. Not just the air conditioning, there was a chill in the way people avoided eye contact, the way even strangers seemed to sense something intimate was about to be laid bare in public. I walked through the security checkpoint with my shoulders back, wearing a navy blue dress, flats, and a quiet steadiness I hadn't felt in years. No jewelry, no makeup, just me, as I was, not as they painted me to be. As I entered the courtroom, I scanned the rows of benches. Seraphine was already there, seated beside a team of attorneys, her posture upright, but her face pale beneath the expertly applied foundation. Valora sat directly behind her, chin lifted, mouth pursed into a line that hadn't softened in decades. I noticed a few familiar faces from church, from community events, people who had watched my sister give speeches, shake hands, smile that politician's smile. They were here to witness a different kind of performance. I took my seat at the front beside my attorney. No words passed between us. We had rehearsed everything. Now it was just time to execute. The judge entered promptly at 9 a.m. A sharp rap of the gavel. Formalities. Then the proceedings began. My lawyer stood first. Calm, professional, surgical. He presented the audio recording. Seraphine's voice, crystal clear. "She's so dumb. I took her money. She doesn't even know." The courtroom didn't gasp. It went quiet. More quiet than a room full of people should be allowed to feel. One man in the back adjusted his tie. A woman 2 rows behind Valora crossed her arms slowly. Then came the paper trail. Bank transactions, forged documents, evidence of unauthorized access to trust accounts. Each piece handed respectfully to the judge, each one a brick in the foundation of truth. My attorney didn't dramatize. He didn't need to. The facts were brutal enough on their own. I glanced toward Seraphine only once. Her jaw was clenched, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wiped a single tear with a tissue she pulled from her sleeve, not a sob, just enough moisture to register as pain. But she didn't speak. She didn't apologize. Then, unexpectedly, Valora raised her hand. "I'd like to make a statement," she said. The judge looked down over his glasses. "You understand this will be under oath?" "I do." They swore her in. She stepped forward, adjusted the hem of her blazer, and turned slightly, half toward the judge, half toward the crowd. "She's always been the soft one," Valora began, nodding in my direction. "Mila was fragile as a child. She cried too easily, took things too personally." I didn't blink. "We had to toughen her up somehow," she continued. "The world isn't kind to girls like that." She paused, glanced at Seraphine, then back at me. "I gave birth to her," she said. "I have the right to protect what's mine." There was a shift in the room. It wasn't dramatic. No one stood up and shouted. But the discomfort became physical. Shoulders shifted, legs uncrossed. A few heads turned toward me with new understanding. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, just long enough to keep them from watering. A part of me had still hoped she would say something else, something human. But pride always came easier to Valora than compassion. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, walked to the front, and faced the judge. "This isn't about revenge," I said, my voice firm but low. "It's about reclaiming what was taken. My name, my dignity, my father's trust." I turned to Seraphine. "You called me dumb. You stole from me. But the worst thing you did was assume I wouldn't survive it." She looked down at her hands. I looked back at the judge. "I have nothing else to add." The judge nodded. "This court will review all evidence presented. A ruling will be delivered within 10 business days." The gavel hit once more. The courtroom buzzed with polite motion, chairs scraping, whispers building. My attorney leaned in to say something, but I was already standing. I didn't need reassurance. Outside, the reporters waited like birds on a wire. Microphones and recorders extended the moment I stepped onto the courthouse steps. "Ms. Thorne, Mila! Do you believe the judge will side with you? Did your sister ever try to settle privately? Any message for your mother?" I paused just long enough to be heard, but not long enough to be cornered. "Justice doesn't always come from a gavel," I said. "Sometimes it's just the truth heard out loud." Then I walked away. 3 days after the hearing, I stood at the threshold of my mother's kitchen, the very place where all this had begun. The sunlight poured in through the half-laced curtains like it always did, warming the tiled floor, softening the edges of the cabinets that had stood in this house since I was a child. The difference now was me. I wasn't shaking anymore. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't knock. I didn't even go inside. I just stood there for a few moments, letting the silence between that house and me stretch as far as it needed to. Then I turned around and drove back home. Back to the version of me that had been forged, not broken. Later that evening, I found myself in my father's old study, the one I'd recreated in my own apartment with his desk, his reading lamp, and a worn leather chair that still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and peppermint. I'd been meaning to go through the rest of the old boxes, but never quite found the courage. Or maybe until now, the reason. In the bottom drawer, beneath old bank ledgers and a yellowed copy of the will, I found an envelope. My name was on it, his handwriting. There was no stamp, no date on the outside, just for Mila. My hands shook, not from fear, but from reverence, as I slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a letter dated 3 months before his passing. I sat down on the floor and unfolded it carefully, as if it might fall apart in my hands. Mila, it began. I always knew you saw what others missed. That's why I trusted you. That's why I made sure you'd be the one to carry forward what matters. Not the money, not the properties, the name. The value of things you can't appraise. I know it hasn't been easy, and I know you often feel out of place in this family. Maybe because you were never willing to play the games they do. That isn't a weakness. It's the reason I believed in you more than I ever said aloud. Whatever happens, don't let them break you. And if they try, let them lose you. My throat tightened. I leaned back against the wall, the paper still in my hand, and let the tears come. But they weren't the bitter kind I'd shed before. These were different. These were the kind you cry when someone finally tells you they saw you, all along. I folded the letter and placed it in a small frame, not to hang on the wall, not for anyone else to read, just to remind myself. Seraphine, by then, had already begun to fall. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of scandal that splashed across national headlines, but her largest investor pulled out, citing instability in leadership. Then came the board vote. She was asked to step down for the good of the brand. She posted a half-hearted apology the following day. It was vague, nothing about what she did, just the kind of performative humility that ended with a quote about new beginnings. Then she deleted her account. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I didn't even feel satisfaction, just closure. And Valora? She disappeared in her own way. A neighbor who still talked to me mentioned they'd seen her walking at dawn, before the sun came up, bundled in a scarf and sunglasses, avoiding people, avoiding conversation. I didn't hate her, but I no longer owed her the version of myself that tried to earn her love. One morning, a few weeks later, I received an email from a local women's organization. They were hosting a seminar about financial abuse inside families, how manipulation and trust violations don't always look like violence. Someone had recommended me as a speaker. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Yes. The event was held in a modest conference room, folding chairs, coffee and paper cups, a worn podium. Nothing glamorous, but it was full. Mothers, daughters, grandmothers, some who had never spoken of what they'd been through. Some who had carried secrets for decades. When I stood at the podium, I didn't read from a script. I didn't wear a blazer. I didn't try to impress them. I just spoke. Sometimes, I began, the people who break us are the ones who raised us. And sometimes, the ones who raise us think they're building strength, when really, they're chiseling away at the voice inside us. I paused. But healing isn't about who apologizes. It's about who rebuilds, piece by piece. After the session, several women came up to hug me. One woman, maybe in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a braid, held my hand tightly and said, "You said everything I've never dared to." That night, back in my apartment, I placed the framed letter beside a new certificate, the official LLC registration for my consulting firm. My business, my name, no one else's. I didn't pour wine to celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I just stood there for a long time, looking at my father's photo and the document beside it. 2 legacies, finally aligned. I inhaled deeply and let the quiet settle around me like a warm blanket. Not emptiness, not loneliness. Peace. They took pieces of me, but I gathered every one. And now, I walk whole. Sometimes, the deepest wounds don't come from strangers, but from the people who claim to love us most. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about reclaiming your voice, even when that voice has been ignored for years. Have you ever had to stand up to your own family just to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. More true stories are coming, stories that speak the truths many are still afraid to say out loud.